Saints fans, and welcome back to another instalment of Saints TVW here on Saints TV, where we'll be wrapping up this week's action of AFLW against the Dogs up in Ballarat. This week was Pride Round, which is an important round on the calendar for the AFL men's game as well as the AFLW. It's important in all aspects of society that we recognise and we celebrate diversity, and that all football lovers come in all different shapes, all different forms. It doesn't matter who you love as long as you love the game. So it was fantastic to see each of the teams recognise Pride Round with a dedicated jumper, but also furthermore to that, just to raise the profile of conversation and discussion about diversity in our community. So we know this is a topic that's important to so many of us, myself included, but also those who simply want to celebrate the wonderful tapestry of diversity that makes up our society. Just onto the game. It was kind of on brand with St Kilda's week, really. I'm sure, like all good Saints fans, we've been grappling with the news of Brett Ratton being shown the door as our men's coach. And so I suppose I looked to this weekend's round of AFLW competition with the hope that it might give me a reason to smile after a really turbulent few days being a supporter of the Saints. And unfortunately, Saturday's action really left us wanting more and left us quite disappointed in terms of the output from the girls. We had a really quick start with 2 quick goals in the first quarter, but beyond that, we really fell away and fell away again, and really got exposed at some points around the ground, but I'll speak to that a little bit later. The final scores, the Bulldogs scored 4 goals, 11, and finished up with a score of 35. We scored 3 goals, 2, and ended up with a score of 20. The scoreline itself was very, very flattering, but I'll come to that in just a moment. The match really was a match of 2 halves, and the first half, the pressure from both teams was really, really high, and Abby Holmes mentioned it on the broadcast a couple of times, not just once, but the pressure from both sides was there, and it was a real arm wrestle in the first half, and you could see that watching the match itself. The pressure gauge would have been going off the charts for both teams. The tackle pressure was really high, and it was a really good arm wrestle to watch from a football spectator's point of view. That being said, I think our development as a side is going to come from our run and spread and hitting a target inside 50. And for anyone watching the game, there was a passage of play in the second quarter where Caitlin Greiser missed one of our goals, where the Dogs really opened us up with run and carry. There's one particular play I think that really set the tone for where we fell away in the second half of the match, because, we were lucky they didn't score from that particular passage of play. But looking at the scoreline, 4 goals, 11, we were lucky for all 4 quarters that the Dogs were not accurate, because they had repeat entries inside 50 and some really lucky misses from our perspective, and some really frustrating misses if you're a Doggies fan. But the difference with our gameplay is that we didn't have that run and carry. I didn't really see much of that run and carry from our perspective. And we often turning the ball over, kicking to contests. It's, the men's game sort of mirrored in the women's game at some point, so it was a little bit frustrating from that perspective. I mentioned that the Dogs missed some key shots, which really let us off the hook in the second quarter. They kicked 5 or 6 behinds in the second quarter from memory. The game we were lucky to be in the game at halftime, 3/4 time, really. In terms of where the game was won and lost, I mentioned about run and carry and hitting a target inside forward 50, but there was also a real discrepancy in our ruck stocks, as well as inside 50s. The numbers were really skewed towards the Dogs. And also our players, we had Alice Burke at one point playing in the ruck, and she's an absolute go-getter. She has fantastic heart and fantastic effort, which makes total sense given her bloodline, if it were. But really, our girls couldn't compete. And so being able to find a clearance from a ruck contest and being able to hit players inside 50 as a consequence really was the difference between the two teams. We're playing this game style where we're playing one loose behind the ball, which is great. I mean, our defense really is probably the thing keeping us in games at the moment, but that's no good if we're not going to be able to capitalize on the rebound and run and spread. So yeah, I'd say second half of the third quarter, but also the fourth quarter was really disappointing. It's like we ran out of puff, and really, I don't want to touch on too many negatives, but just from an armchair critic's perspective, and it might be unfair to say given that I don't play the game at the level, but quite frankly, some players looked a little bit lazy, sort of a little bit worried to sort of get in and under, in comparison to some of their teammates who were putting on some excellent pressure, especially through tackling. So perhaps that's something Dal needs to address in the coming weeks. Work rate, level and effort. Dal was dropped, I think it was in 2008, when his effort wasn't at the level, and really it formed him as a player that he became. So it might be worth thinking about, given that we've only got a couple of games left for the season. Finals is out of contention for us, that we think about perhaps blooding some youth, and setting a standard in terms of the work rate that we want to see from our side. In terms of the players themselves, we had 3 goals from 3 separate goal kickers, 1 from the Big G train, Caitlin Greiser, 1 from Georgia Patrikios, and 1 from Nicola Stevens. But from memory, and again, I might be wrong about this, if we scored in the second half, it was very early on, but those first 2 goals came in the first quarter, and then we found it really hard to impact on the scoreboard after that. Our best players, I think in every video so far this year I've mentioned Bianca Jacobson. She would have to be winning our best and fairest by a mile at this point, which would see her win them back-to-back. She had 20 disposals and 4 tackles, and really it was our key intercept marker in the back line. She's been that all year, and has just been sensational. So she again stood out. Darcy Gutrich as well. She's had a fantastic year and somewhat flies under the radar, I think. In fairness, she had she had 12 disposals yesterday, but they were effective disposals, really effective disposals. She's a good ball user, and that's why she stuck out to me watching the coverage yesterday. I mentioned Alice Burke before, who's just going from strength to strength. She had 12 touches and 4 tackles, and she was one of those players that was the real driver of those standards that we wanted to see as a team, that high-pressure game. She was everywhere, all over the ground. I mentioned that she played in the ruck for a lot of the match, so she was brilliant. Hannah Priest, our skipper, again, a real tone setter as a player. She had 13 touches and 4 tackles, again, making up one of the really essential pillars of our backline that has stood up so well against some really fierce opposition, and has been responsible, really, I think, for keeping us in matches. But also some really gallant efforts from Hannah Stewart, and Molly McDonald keeps him going from strength to strength each week now that she's getting a consistent run in the side. It was a massive pressure game from Olivia Vesely. She had 12 touches and 8 tackles, which is absolutely massive. Not to mention Deanna Jolliffe, who had 6 touches but 5 tackles. So, the players that, look to be perhaps not fulfilling the team responsibility in terms of tackle and pressure, all they have to do is look to players like, Jacobson and Priest and Stewart and McDonald and Jolliffe and Olivia Vesely to see where that effort needs to come from, to replicate that effort. Because if more of us start to do it, then perhaps, we'll start to get a little bit more cohesion as a team. Speaking of tackling pressure, Nat Exon, she was absolutely huge in our game yesterday. And there was a piece of play on in the second quarter on the wing, and I apologise if it wasn't Nat Exon, but there was a really piece of desperate play in that second quarter on the wing, where she absolutely stopped the Doggies player in her tracks with a huge tackle, and I think should be held up as an example for the way that we want to play. Nat Exon finished up from memory with 9 touches, but 11 tackles. A huge game from Nat Exon. Again, another massive tackle from Tani White that was a standout for me in a 50-metre penalty later in the match. Again, it's less about impacting our game in terms of the result, but more just a tone setter for what we want to see from the girls. Another highlight just before I wrap up was Janome Anderson. She's a massive talent and is only going to go from strength to strength. She's only 17 years old. I know that when I was 17, my biggest choice for the week was, when I was going to get my homework done and what colour cruiser I was going to drink on the weekend. Janome Anderson, 17 years old, playing in the AFLW and going from strength to strength. As I mentioned, like Molly McDonald beforehand, she took a wonderful contested mark in the second half, and her composure to, you know, perhaps hit up an option rather than sort of bomb the ball for goal will come from experience. But I am going to leave it there for today. We've got 2 matches left. I believe we've got Port Adelaide this coming weekend. I could be wrong about that. I should just check the fixture, really. But what I'm hoping to see from the girls in the coming week, I really want to see consistency of effort from the 4 quarters. I really don't want to see us drop away. I really don't want to see us, I suppose, waste opportunities. I really want to see us, you know, take opportunities when we drive forward, take opportunities when we go inside 50, and essentially try to put on a little bit more scoreboard pressure, because you can see the frustration out there on the field. You can see the frustration with some of the players. It would be good to get back on the winners list next week, but I'm going to leave it there. Thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying the content. Thank you for those who are providing feedback and engaging in the conversation. Let's try and get as many Saints supporters that we can down to RSEA Park on the weekend to watch the girls. Keep in touch with the Saints TV channel with all things AFLW and all things AFL and Coach Watch. And we'll see what happens on both fronts in the coming days. But until I see you next week, go Saints.